Well, thanks everyone, and welcome to the first of two workshops that we're putting on around the Economic Development Administration's American Rescue Plan programs, or as we'll be calling them, EDA ARPA programs. This is part of JTF's technical assistance work in order to help communities navigate and apply for federal funding, the federal funding opportunities that are currently available to coal communities. So Rebecca, if you can go to the next slide. So just a quick overview of our goals today. For our time together, we will work to understand what funding is currently available through the EDA ARPA programs. And in thinking about your community and context and the work that you're doing, chart the best course forward for your community in seeking these funds. During our time together, after a bit of housekeeping and background, we're going to discuss how to identify project needs and kind of go through the project ideation opportunities, thinking about those needs and how potential projects can align with the EDA ARPA funding opportunities that are available. And then we'll discuss 4 steps that you can take right now to start the process towards your grant development. We'll have some time at the end of the meeting for question and answer and discussion. We have a good group, small group today, so we'll have some time for discussion. But during the course of the presentation, please feel free to drop any comments in the chat box. So as Rebecca mentioned, if you're not speaking right now, you can keep yourself on mute, drop in the chat box, and then we'll be sending this recording out after the meeting to folks, but we are here recording. You want to go to the next slide? So before we dive in, just a quick introduction to the Just Transition Fund. We're an organization that works across the country with communities that are impacted by the energy transition. And our goal is to help build resilient communities by advancing economic solutions that are equitable, inclusive, and low carbon. And we do this through a number of programs, but in 2 main ways. One, through our grant making, where we make direct investments to those communities that are most economically hardest hit through the energy transition, and then through our work on the ground and our technical assistance, where we partner with a wide range of stakeholders to help advance transition planning and creating action plans for your community. And so just a bit about your presenters today. I'm Emily Rhodes. I'm the Technical Assistance and Planning Manager with the Just Transition Fund. And I am joined here by my colleague, Rebecca, who will be leading us through the content today.
Thank you, Emily. I'm really excited to be here with you all. And my background is pretty deep in grant geekiness. So I'm happy to answer your questions here and help think about moving from big picture into concrete grant development for this historic opportunity. And just a reminder, I think a lot of folks have introduced themselves in the chat, but if you haven't, go ahead and let us know who you are, where you're coming from, and what level of experience you have with EDA funding. And it looks like, from what I've seen in the chat so far, we have a pretty wide variety of levels of experience with EDA. So I think there will be something here for everybody, for folks who've been through the EDA process a lot, and for folks who are new to it. And do feel free to drop questions in the chat as we're going. So just to ground us here, I think everybody's aware of this, but the reason we're here is that there's a really significant funding opportunity out there. American Rescue Plan gave EDA $3 billion in supplemental funding. That is a lot for EDA. So it's a big opportunity. The goal of the funding is to support recovery from COVID pandemic economic impacts and to build economic systems that are going to be resilient in the future to economic shocks. And relevant to this group, 300 million of that 3 billion is specifically committed to coal communities through 2 specific opportunities. And we'll talk about what that means later. It doesn't, well, what I will say now is it does not mean that those are the only 2 opportunities that US coal communities should go to. So what does it mean for us? It means that this is a historic opportunity. It's very exciting, but it does still require a strategic approach. If anything, it requires more of a strategic approach than everybody could just mute who's joining. That would be really helpful for the audio. And Emily, I think you can just directly mute people also as they come in. Why is it important to approach these grants strategically? Because this is a historic opportunity, you want the money to have the biggest, most important impact it can in your community, right? This is not something that's going to continue. There is going to be more funding. You know, they're working on infrastructure right now. It's not the only opportunity, but because it's a one-time opportunity, you want to really approach it strategically. You want to really look at what your community needs and how you can use this funding to advance your transition and set yourself up for that resilient, sustainable, equitable future that EDA is wanting to fund. So we're going to talk about strategy a little bit. It's a lot of money, but it doesn't mean they're just going to hand it to you. And that's important to remember. So lots of communities are going for this money. It's still going to be competitive. You still need to have a project that's going to be a good fit for the opportunity and a good fit for your community. I like to say that you need to get a grant, you need two things. You need that strong project and you need a strong case for the project. And it's so much easier to make that case for the project if it is indeed from the beginning the right project for your community. So what does that mean to have the right project for your community? It means it needs to build on your unique assets, address the gaps and barriers that your community has, and meet this moment now. So on the right here, I really love this slogan that the EDA Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship has. They don't tend to write this down, but every time they do a presentation, you'll hear them talk about being place-based, bottom-up, specific to your needs. That's the kind of work that they want to see, that they want to fund. And so if you can keep that in mind, that's what they want, it will keep you from getting distracted and chasing the money, right? So there's a danger with grant funding that you will approach it thinking about what does the funder want first. It's really important, if you want the funding to have the most impact in your community, to think first about what your community needs, and then think about how to get the grant money to make that happen. And the wonderful thing about this opportunity is that EDA wants you to do that. EDA wants you to bring them projects that are really based in what's happening in your community right now and what needs to happen next. So this fits really well with the work that JTF does around building transition plans. So I'm going to hand it back to Emily for a minute to talk a little bit about that and about how that work can dovetail with this work.
Thanks, Rebecca. If you want to go to the next slide too, just have a couple notes. Oh, perfect. So as Rebecca said, having the right project or plan for your community, it does take time and planning. And so even if your community might not be ready to go for this particular round of funding, it's still a great time to start planning and thinking about what are those transformational projects, what are the actions that different stakeholders in your community can take, how can you bring the community members together to talk about what future you all see as you're looking at diversifying or moving your economy forward. And this is something that JTF can support with through our technical assistance planning work. So I'd encourage you, you can reach out to us through our website. We also have a build your plan document on our website that is really specifically targeted towards communities and groups that are just starting to think about, okay, we know that this transition is taking place. What now? How do we, think about bringing the community together to talk about our goals, create our shared vision, identifying the needs in our community to really have that strong project that will move your community forward. One other item with this that I just wanted to put in there as well is, when applying for federal funds in particular, that there are, a series of timing or registrations that's needed. So as part of kind of that, initial planning process, thinking about, again, what your community vision is, I'd encourage you to go to grants.gov if you have not already applied for grants there, and just look at what some of the requirements are. This is just one important step to take as you're kind of setting up the community, your community, and getting ready to apply for those funds in the future.
Yeah, it's important to think about early, even if you're not sure that you're going to be going for funding this round. It's good to go do that paperwork, get it out of the way, make sure those registrations are all in place, so that when opportunities do come up, you can jump on them. So just putting in a plug for doing that process. So what is EDA interested in? I said they're interested in what your community needs, which is great, but clearly they have their own priorities within that. So on the right here on the slide, we have the EDA Investment Priorities: equity, recovery and resilience, workforce development, manufacturing, tech-based economic development, environmentally sustainable development, and exports and foreign direct investments. So those are all areas that EDA is specifically interested in. And whenever EDA funds something, it has to be connected to one of these 7 investment priorities. As you can see, they're pretty broad. So most of the things that you're probably thinking about will fall under one of these investment priorities. Everything that is funded through the rescue plan dollars, which some people are calling ARP, some people are calling ARPA. I think the administration would like us to call them rescue plan. Everything that's funded through that pot of money has to address, at minimum, the recovery and resilience priority. That's a requirement. That shouldn't be too hard. In addition to that, you're probably going to want to address also the equity priority, which is very important to EDA right now, and at least one more. So just keeping that in mind. The other alignment question for projects that are going to be funded through this money, because for those of you who are EDA geeks, because all this money is coming through the economic adjustment assistance mechanism in the background, it all has to be aligned with local economic development plans, SEDS or equivalent. And so when we send out the slides, you can follow this link to learn more about those plans. Those plans come through local economic development districts. So it's good to connect with those folks and make sure what you're proposing is in line, and also just to get people together and on the same page. So on a practical level, so we know from the previous slide what EDA wants on an outcomes kind of level, what kind of work they want to support. On a practical level, they have 2 types of grants. They have construction grants and non-construction grants. On the construction side, we're talking about facilities and infrastructure, and there are some examples here. Incubators and accelerators, facilities for the programs like workforce training or entrepreneurship, things like that, manufacturing, and even public works and infrastructure. The fact that they will fund broadband through this is a really good thing for people to know. On the non-construction side, we're looking at programming. So that can be entrepreneurship, workforce development. The workforce development funded through EDA does have to have a really strong connection to economic development, but they are funding workforce now. Design and engineering and planning and TA kinds of projects, and revolving loan funds. So these are just sort of on the practical side, some of the things that they can fund. So I'm sure that most folks have been working on this stuff, that there are project ideas out there that you have. So the first thing to do with that project idea, even before you know what opportunity you're going for, is to just sketch it out, right? And this really helps make a strong project. It helps you make a competitive project, but it also helps you figure out which opportunity you should be going for. So the first thing to do, always start with the end in mind. What are you trying to achieve? What is the impact that you're trying to achieve? And working back from that, what kind of things will you need to do to achieve that impact? And that's where you start to see, okay, what does this project look like? What kinds of practical things are you going to need to fund? What resources are you going to need? And that's both funding, funding is very important, but also the kinds of expertise or partnerships, things like that, that you're going to need. And who's going to take the lead? Hardly ever with one of these projects will it just be one organization doing the work. Usually there's some partnerships involved, but somebody has to be the lead organization to manage the federal funds, which is a lift. So that's something that you have to figure out early. There are also questions around eligibility for these grants. In this case, because of the way it's structured, for-profit entities are not eligible for this funding. So it has to be a public entity, higher education, a nonprofit, something like that, but it cannot be a for-profit entity. And then, so once you have your idea sketched out like that, then you can turn to the opportunities and align with that. Oh, double advancing again here, just a second. Okay, so these are the opportunities. And I'm just going to spend a little time with this. You'll notice that there's some color coding here because they're using different processes for these opportunities, and we'll talk about what that looks like in a second. But the big regional opportunities here are the Build Back Better Regional Challenge and the Good Jobs Challenge. Build Back Better is the one that has a deadline coming right up. In just a little over a month. So that's a bit of a scramble for folks who are thinking about that. What they're interested in doing there, it's the most ambitious funding opportunity that we've seen from EDA recently. They're interested in funding regional growth clusters. So this is beyond an individual community. Now they have a somewhat flexible definition of region, which is good, but you have to be able to make a case for the regionality of the project. And it's a big group of partners coming together, a coalition, to build a regional growth cluster. And the interesting thing about this opportunity is that it's a two-phase process. They start out by giving a $500,000 planning grant, and you use that money to develop an implementation grant, which is due in the spring. And implementation funding is for multiple projects to build those regional growth clusters from a floor, basically a floor, it seems like, of 25 million all the way up to 100 million for those projects. So this is a really big opportunity, and this does have a goal set aside. They're saying they're going to set aside at least, these are floors, right? So at least 100 million of that for coal communities. Now, that's potentially only 4 awards. So these are big projects, but there is a good goal set aside there. And that deadline is coming right up. The next regional challenge opportunity is not due until the winter. And that is the Good Jobs Challenge, which is building regional workforce training systems. So they have 500 million set aside for that. They have not said exactly how big they're going to make the awards, although they have said that there will be 25 to 50 of those awards. So they're looking to spread them out around the country. And those are, again, that's a really interesting opportunity if you in your region have a bunch of partners who want to come together and really work on that workforce training system. But it has to be regional, it has to be big, it's ambitious. Next, we have economic adjustment assistance, which will be familiar to anybody who's worked with EDA before. As they say, this is their most flexible funding mechanism. They can fund pretty much anything on that list that we looked at a couple of slides ago through this opportunity. And these grants are usually from about $500,000 to $5 million is what they're expecting through this. And they have a coal set aside of $200 million in this opportunity. So most folks in coal communities are going to be looking at this opportunity, economic adjustment assistance. These projects involve some collaboration with EDA to make sure that the project is right, but you still need to come to them with a concept and say, this is what our community wants to do. Now, the next two, the Indigenous communities opportunity is just like EAA, but specifically for Indigenous communities. And even if you're a coal community, that doesn't say that there's a set aside in there. It's still a good choice to go for the Indigenous communities opportunity. This is something that EDA can help you figure out. And they've also done an interesting thing here, which I've never seen them do before. They've offered to move things from one competition to the other after application. And I think that that's their way of saying, we're going to try and fund as much as possible. And if it turns out that there are too many applications in one bucket, we'll be able to move it to another bucket in order to fund it. So know that that does exist. But if you are an Indigenous community, this is probably the one that you're going to want to go to. The travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation opportunity is two-pronged. They have some state money that's going out, and they also have some money that's competitive. So that competitive pot is 140 million, and it's also flexible. It's working very much like economic adjustment assistance, although they've prioritized saying infrastructure and workforce, but they have flexibility in that one also. And that's really intended to help communities that have really been affected by the downturn in travel and tourism. Statewide, I'll just do a little note here about statewide planning and research networks. The way they've phrased the title of this one is a little bit hard to follow, but it's statewide planning. So there's some money going to states for that. And then also research and networks. So they are looking for proposals to actually evaluate all of the impact of all of this funding and develop communities of practice for grantees. So if that's something that you're interested in, it's worth taking a look at that, because that deadline is also coming up at the end of October. It's a lot to take in. One thing I do want to flag to do with it, you notice that I color-coded these, right? So the two challenges and the statewide planning and research networks are national competitions, and the others are happening at the regional level. And this is important because EDA functions very differently at the regional and national levels. At national competitions have a tendency to function in more of an arm's length kind of way. They don't want to bias the competition. It's one big pool for the whole country. And so you can ask them questions, but they're not going to work with you to co-create the project. And some examples of that kind of a process for those folks who are familiar with EDA, the Build to Scale Challenge, the Build to Scale Venture Challenge, the Capital Challenge, formerly called Seed Fund Support, STEM Talent Challenge. Those are all national competitions, and Build Back Better and Good Jobs Challenge are going to function somewhat like those competitions, if you have that as a point of reference. And the Research and National Technical Assistance Program is a good one to have in mind when you're thinking about how the statewide planning and research and networks program is going to work. And at the regional level, at the other pots of money are being divvied up between the EDA's regions and run out of the regions. So that's economic adjustment assistance, Indigenous communities, and travel and tourism. So for those, the process is very collaborative. You need to connect with your representative, let them know what you're thinking about. They'll help you think it through, help you develop a project that's right for what they're looking to fund. And the other interesting difference between the the national and regional processes has to do with the format of the application itself. So folks who have not done an EDA application, the national competitions usually have a project narrative, plus lots of attachments. But the narrative, it's a narrative document where they ask, you have to address certain certain questions in that narrative, but it's one narrative document. And at the regional applications are very different. They're based on the ED 900 form, which is a series of text boxes in grants.gov that quest with specific questions that you need to answer about your project. So it's a very different format for the application. The other big difference is that the national competitions have a single deadline and the regional competitions are rolling. And the key thing to know about that rolling deadline is that it means you need to get in there early because the money gets used up. So on the one hand, it's rolling. It's great that you don't have to scramble for a deadline. On the other hand, it actually makes it a little more urgent in some ways, that you really do need to reach out to them and start that process because it can take a while and you want the money to still be there. I see we have a question about contacting EDRs. We can drop a link to the EDR contact. It's in all of the notices of funding opportunity. So on the previous slide here, no, the other direction. So these links on the left take you to the opportunity page for each of these. And one of the things that you will find there, you'll find a lot of resources, and they're really good resources. EDA is just doing a really great job with this in terms of creating decks and summary information, webinar presentations, everything like that. So absolutely take advantage of those resources, but also in the notice of funding opportunity, which in EDA terms is the request for proposals, which is also called a NOFO, you will see regional contacts that you should reach out to. So you find your state and say, okay, this is the contact for my state. And I recommend reaching out to them via email. And Emily has put the link to those EDR contacts in the chat, which is great. All right. So feel free to pipe in with questions like that as we go. Another sort of logistical concern with EDA funding is matching funds. And so this has been a barrier for a lot of communities in the past with EDA funding, because a lot of EDA opportunities, especially the national ones, have required one-to-one match, local non-federal match, which means that half of the money comes from the local community and half of the money comes from EDA. And that can be a really big barrier. So one of the exciting things about these opportunities is that the requirement for match in most cases is much less. So the total with this, the term of art is grant rate. So if the whole project costs $1 million and EDA covers 800,000 of that and 200,000 of that comes from the community, that's on the 80% grant rate. The EDA is granting 80% of the money for the project. So some of the rescue plan funding opportunities allow 100% grant rate across the board, which is an amazing opportunity. That's Indigenous communities, Good Jobs Challenge, statewide planning research and networks, and the first round of Build Back Better, so that planning round of Build Back Better. The others have language that say that the grant rate can be 80 to 100% depending on needs. So if you're going to ask for 100% grant rate on one of the others, you have to have a good case for it. And the case can be, you've exhausted your borrowing capacity if you're a public entity, you have had really extreme economic impact of COVID, the region is very economically stressed, things like that. You can make a case. The other side of that coin is that offering to include some match can make the project more competitive, because from EDA's perspective, it feels like they're leveraging other money to get the work done. And so there's a balance there that you have to think about. And the regional opportunities, the EDR, Economic Development Representative, can help you think about that. Another thing to keep in mind is that in-kind can count as match here. So in-kind staff time, space, equipment, things like that. So it doesn't the match doesn't necessarily have to be cash. So you can keep that in mind as well. So what do you do now? The first thing to do, you have a project idea, is to align it with these opportunities that we just went through. And the first thing I would ask is about scope when you're doing that alignment. Is it an ambitious regional project? Are you bringing together partners across sectors and geographies? If it's that big, ambitious regional scope, you're probably looking at one of the two national challenges. Keep in mind that you really do have to be able to herd cap for those, right? You really have to be able to bring people together across those regions and sectors. And for Build Back Better, that's really soon. That's coming right up. So just keeping that in mind. If your idea is focused on local needs, then you're looking at Indigenous communities, travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation, or economic adjustment assistance. And which of those you go for depends on what kind of community you're coming from. And if you do have an idea that is about helping EDA evaluate or support their programs, then that's the statewide planning, research, and networks opportunity. So once you've got your opportunity, double again, the next step in the process is to write it out very briefly, right? So remember, you did that structure exercise where you said, okay, what are we trying to achieve? What do we need to do to achieve it? What do we need? And who's going to take the lead? You need to take that information and put it into a quick summary of your project, no more than a page or two, to share with the economic development representative. And this is incredibly important for the regional opportunities, and also this time important for the national opportunities as a courtesy to the EDRs, so they know what's coming, and also because they can give you a little bit of feedback, more than usual with the national opportunities. So what you need to let them know is what program you're interested in, what kind of a project it is, and how much money you need for it, what the geography is that it's covering, the region, who's taking the lead, what you're going to do, what you're going to produce, and what kind of impact it's going to have. Keep it really simple, really simple and straightforward. The EDRs are taking on so much work right now that I really don't know how they're doing it. They are being really good about scheduling these calls, but they have a lot to do. So the more you can do to make their job easier, the better. So putting together that really quick summary, you send it to them via email and ask for a call to talk about it. And before you get on that call, just make sure you're prepared. They don't have a lot of time, so you want to make the best use of their time. So you want to make sure that it's the right rescue plan opportunity, that they think you're going for the right competition, any ways that they would suggest refining the project. Often EDRs have a really good global view of what's happening in their region. So they might be able to suggest, if you're going for one of these regional opportunities, oh, you should talk to so-and-so. You know, they can really make those connections for you in a helpful way. And then what should you do? Which steps should you take when you're preparing the proposal? They might be able to say, well, you really need to make sure you explain this part of it clearly, or reviewers are going to have questions about this. So listen, take good notes in that call. Really make the most of it. Also, really make sure you've read all of the documents before you have that call, because you don't want to waste time talking about things that you could have found the answers to in another way. So this is a really important part of the process, and it's also very, very helpful in terms of your project development process. So take advantage of it. And after that, you're ready to dive into the grant development. You want to start by reviewing that feedback and making any kinds of adjustments to your concept that you might need to make, and that they sometimes will be significant and sometimes not. It really depends. Make sure, like Emily talked about earlier, that all your grants.gov accounts and everything like that and registrations are up to date. Register and attend the workshop we're going to do on the writing process for EDA. We're going to have an opportunity to have to provide a certain amount of one-on-one TA support specifically dedicated to these projects. And what that's going to look like, we're going to be able to provide some one-on-one consultations. So a call to sit down and talk through what you're looking at and how you might design it and develop the proposal, and some review opportunities. So once you've drafted your proposal documents, be able to share it with somebody who's experienced with EDA grants and get some feedback. So Emily, do you want to talk a little bit about how that process will work?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. So after the conversation today, sometime next week, we'll be sending out a quick application form. Again, it will be short, but just a general description of your community, how far along you are in the project ideation, partnership building, just so we can get a sense of where you're at, what any timing constraints that you might have. So if you're, when you're looking to submit a grant, for what program you're potentially thinking about. And then we'll review those and look at our timeline and set up a time with a handful of different groups. We're working to get more capacities so we'll hopefully be able to help most of the people who would be looking for that. But at this point, we will have a limited number of hours, but that is something that we'll be able to provide. And we anticipate that one-on-one support will most likely begin in towards the end of the month.
Yeah, and so one thing you can do on that application form is let us know about timing. For example, if you really are looking at going for Build Back Better, make sure that's very clear so we can try and prioritize supporting projects that are coming right up. So that's an opportunity. Like Emily said, we're working on getting as much capacity as possible, and we want to support as many communities as possible, but it's possible that we won't be able to support everyone. So we're just trying to triage with that application form and make sure that we're supporting in the best way we can. So that you've got getting support from the JTF and doing your own drafting and development of documents. Keep communicating with your economic development representative, depending on who you're working with and depending on what kind of opportunity you're working on. They may want to talk to you more than one time and really work on refining that concept with you. That is the usual process. However, they are going to be very slammed, so I'm not sure how much of that they're going to be able to offer. But taking your cue from them about how often they want to meet and how much they want to communicate. Writing and revising, make sure you're getting feedback, even if it's not from the JTFTA program, if it's from other folks who have experience with EDA. Getting feedback on grant documents is really helpful. Outside eyes on the documents are really good. Preparing those forms and attachments and submitting. So what questions do folks have? What can we, feel free to drop them in the chat, or we've got, only about 20 people, so you could also pipe in the audio, but happy to answer questions.
I'm going to say, if people want to turn on videos, we do have a small enough group that I think we can make this conversational. We'd love to hear what you're all working on and thinking about.
And don't be shy. I mean, I think that one of the things that we've noticed that folks are interested in right now is connecting with other communities that are working on the same challenges. And especially since you're not all in the same region, you're not all necessarily competing with each other, and it's a big pot of money this time. So, we've got a question in the chat here. When does the funding cycle begin for the regional grants? It's already started. So they're already accepting applications for the regional grants. And this is not going to be an annual opportunity. This is an opportunity. This is a one-time thing. This is the rescue plan money is a one-time thing. Now, annually, it does there are certain windows for different regular competitions, but this is an off-cycle opportunity, this money. And so the time to do the concept development and to start reaching out is now. Depending on what you're interested in. We'll be offering, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to echo on that one too, is again, great to look ahead. And so if you can, this is an off cycle, but if, you're starting to think about what those projects look like now's the time to start gathering what the impacts will be. If you're, have those specific, there are specific goals and things that EDA is looking for in these particular NOFOs, but it will most likely always be things like, how many jobs will be created. If you're looking at the workforce or training program, being able to have that data, the information about what jobs are available in the region or what are the growing industries. So, now is a great time to start thinking about that data to support any project in the future as well.
Absolutely. So thinking about how you make that case, gathering that data is really important because, we'll go over this more in the, when you're the writing for EDA workshop, but EDA is really looking for projects that are taking advantage of a certain moment or opportunity on the ground in a community. And having data to support that is really important. So if you can dig in and say, this is the trajectory of this sector in our region, and we really think now is the time to focus here, and this is, numerically why we think that's very, very helpful to making that case. There was another question here about guidance on attachments like environmental docs for construction projects, things like that. I think that the review, and Emily can chime in on this too, but I think the reviews that we're going to be offering are going to be more focused on the grants aspect of it. So for that, it would be ED 900 answers and things like that. We're happy to look at the whole picture. But the other thing is that we can, depending on what kind of expertise folks need, we can connect people with expertise. Emily, you want to talk about those attachments?
Yeah, I think that's right, Rebecca, is that the support will be, the high level grant review. Are the main concepts clear? Do you have the data to support and back up, confirming that you have all, the boxes checked and the right attachments there? And then I would say it would probably be on a case by case basis. If someone needed very specific, phase 1, phase 2, environmental review documentations, that's something that we could talk about and would, see if there's someone in our network that we'd be able to connect with on that.
Yeah, so just again, whatever the needs that you see that you have for proposal review support, put them in that application form and let us know as much as you can. Clearly, a lot of folks are at the beginning of the process. They know they're going to need some consultation and review support, and you might not know every detail of it now, and that's totally fine. But as much as you do, if you do know already that you're going to need support around reviewing a certain attachment, really great to put that in there so we know what the needs are. So great. Any other questions or thoughts?
Or if folks have applied for EDA previously and have, a best practice or a thought, that they want to share, add in, we, also want to draw from the experiences of this group.
Absolutely.
This is Amy. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Amy.
I just wanted to ask how this funding, because you guys have a call for proposals open now, right? The JTF does for policy and planning.
Oh, yes. So as I was describing our grant making arm, JTF has our separate through our grant making process. Yes, we have an RFP out right now.
Okay, so is any of Are any of these really overlapping with that call in any ways? I mean, that we could think about in any, competitive ways or something?
Yeah, so from so to Amy's point, the current RFP that we have out is for projects that advance transition planning or policy work. And so, to the point about, planning early, if you're if you have a plant that's closing or is retiring or a mine, or, or can indicate the impact that the energy transition is having on your community and are looking to start that planning process, I think that, having a thought towards, because we are looking to bring the community together to talk about the vision and think about the potential projects and proposals that could go for funding. I think that is where you could, now that wouldn't be the only goal of, I think, what JTF would be looking for in their RFP grant making, but I think that could be a component of what that application would look like and would hope to achieve as part of a broader planning exercise.
And this EDA funding can be used for planning as well. That's one of the potential pieces of the EAA. You want to talk to them about that if you have a planning need. You need to consult with EDR about how they would want to see that. They're looking at really funding significant projects, at least $500,000, and a lot of times planning projects, at least in smaller communities, don't cost that much. But it could be a component of another project, but they are open to that as a piece of it.
Okay, so you said the Build Back Better has the 2 rounds.
Yep.
And the first round's the 500,000, the planning stage.
Yep.
And now you're saying the economic adjustment assistance is also could be a planning.
It does. That's one of the things that they have listed as a possibility. Now, often that means, here, let me see if I can go back to the slide here. This is how they've summarized it on their material. So technical planning, workforce, entrepreneurship, public works, or infrastructure, basically anything they ever fund. So if you do have a planning need that's significant in your community, you can go to them for that. Now, I think you would really want to be very clear about what that planning is leading to in terms of implementation, rather than just doing an overall, say, a stakeholder engagement process. But yes, they are open to funding planning through EAA.
So on those kinds of projects, are we going to be better off to have a bunch of partners too, like maybe the city governments and the local nonprofits and universities? And is that always going to be the case that we're going to need to have a coalition?
I think so.
Partners.
I mean, they can be, they can be engaged at different levels, but it's always going to strengthen one of these proposals to have a broad coalition going into the project together. Now, they don't want to see you just bringing in people just to name check and say, okay, this organization's on board, this organization's on board. They need to all have a role and a reason to be part of the coalition. But for a planning project, having a lot of folks together absolutely makes sense.
Well, and just remember too, for all of these, to I think maybe one slide earlier, Rebecca's point that there will always need to be that connection to the broader, I don't know what slide it was, but to your SEDS, to your broader economic development strategy and your county. Yep. So from that perspective too, having those partnerships and relationships to say, whatever the project is part of this broader community vision and effort going forward will be an important component.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. So are there any other questions? I mean, this chart here has a lot of information on it. Any other questions about the different programs and what they're looking for? Or other questions?
Okay, I got another one for you.
Yeah.
So, like, if I was going to go after the EAA for planning, so is this one of the rolling ones? Would I be able to apply again once I get the planning done?
Yes, so that's an interesting possibility, is that, it depends on how soon they get this money out the door. They're trying to like really get this money out the door as soon as they can. However, getting this much money out the door is a big job for EDA. And so that's something to talk to your EDR about. What's the best way to structure a project? Is it better to submit a smaller planning project now and come back later for an implementation grant? Or is it better to try and structure a grant now that would cover planning and implementation in some way? It's possible that you wouldn't actually be able to do that depending on what stage you're at in planning, but that's a conversation to have with them.
Okay, thank you.
And they're very helpful. They're very knowledgeable. Yeah, the EAA is going to be a really great opportunity for coal communities. There's a huge set aside. It's a very flexible program. That's probably where most folks are going to be focused, unless they're specifically looking at something travel tourism oriented, unless you're in a native nation, in which case you want to go to the indigenous communities because it has that 100% grant rate. Slightly better terms, or unless you have one of these grand regional ambitious projects, in which case you want to go to the national competitions. But I'm thinking that probably most folks are going to be focused in there on EAA because of that flexibility and the coal set aside.
Okay, I just thought of another question.
Yeah.
Does infrastructure include like public housing?
Housing is not usually a part of what EDA does.
Yeah, but any sort of residential development, I believe, at least for the EAA, they've listed as an ineligible activity.
Yeah. Sometimes there are mixed use projects that have some uses that are eligible for EDA and some that aren't. So I have seen projects where EDA has funded something that included a housing element, but that element was funded by someone else. So it can get complicated if you want it to get complicated. But no, it's not. Housing is not one of the things that they consider public works or infrastructure.
Okay, thank you.
Although we know it's connected. Absolutely. It's important. Other questions? How are we doing on time? Got about 5 more minutes.
About 5 minutes.
Do we have folks on the call who are going for Build Back Better? Or still thinking about it?
I'd be thinking about it.
Yeah.
In Southern Illinois. We already have a pretty good coalition
Cool.
established, so I'm not sure what we would build or where, but
yeah, so the key thing there, I've been on some EDR calls the last couple of weeks, and just to give some context, really defining the growth cluster is important. And that can be harder in more rural areas, right? But you do need to be able to have a unified concept of what that cluster is. So say software, or there are different ways of, you can find some folks I was talking to recently said, well, we could say they wanted to do some stuff in biotech and some stuff in solar and some stuff and there was a way that they could knit it all together by calling it a computational cluster. But like, be creative, but make sure you can define that cluster and say, this is the thing that we're growing. We're not just growing the region, we are growing this specific cluster. So that's really important for those.
And not to sound like a broken record, but truly reaching out to the EDR early on that too. We have an example in another community that we were working with that we did connect with the EDR, and then that the EDR connected us with, to Rebecca's point earlier about them having kind of this great regional landscape. We're able to say, you all should talk, because I've now talked to all of you about, you know, these similar kind of growing industries in these areas. So
Yeah.
they'll have a good kind of finger on the pulse on what else is happening in Southern Illinois, Amy.
Yeah, and they've just like the fact that they can say, they can even tell you, you know, well, so and so reached out to me about doing something similar. Why don't you connect with them? And so that they are able to make those connections.
Okay, thank you. And did you say you put the link to the state contacts in the chat?
Yes, I can drop it in one more time.
Oh, that's okay. I can go back and find it. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, this is exciting, and we're looking forward to seeing more folks on the workshop about writing, and also working with folks one-on-one.
Yeah.
Really appreciate everybody's time. This stuff is not necessarily the most interesting way to spend your noon hour, but hopefully we made it as interesting as we could.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great afternoon.